the most likely time for a new, what I would call single gift donor to become a monthly donor is within the first 30 to 60 days.
Your best prospect list is the list of folks that just attended your event. Maybe you get on the phone with them or send them that email about the monthly recurring if you didn't take advantage of it.
But one of the other reasons recurring donors are so valuable is because they're 6 times more likely than general donors to leave a estate or planned gift or a major gift in that way.
Yeah, they feel like they're a part of something. Once again, it's that community piece. Sounds cliche at this point, but it's so true.
I'm talking about how can we accelerate that by actually taking advantage of the fact that donors, more than at any other time in history, are more primed to give on a recurring basis.
Appreciate you coming, Dave. But you are I call folks like you a polymath.
I think is that a compliment?
I hope you take it that way because I meant it that way. Yeah. But I don't know you from Imago Consulting. I know you from the book. Okay. And congratulations on the book, The Rise of Sustainable Giving. Super cool. You and I, full disclosure, had a really cool conversation. I'm very, very, obviously you are too. You wrote a book about it. So I want to get into that. But I'm super passionate about, and I love how you put it, the subscription economy. Right? Like payments, monthly, this, and it just dovetails so nicely into recurring donations. And I'm on that big time. And, you and I were talking about the fact that we do so many in-person events and how you can kind of like mesh that in. And so I want to riff about that. But, how did you get on this? Obviously it was a huge project of yours. I'm assuming it took a couple of years. I believe that you said that when we talked last, but this monthly recurring or just the subscription economy, like I said, and how that weaves into donations and folks supporting your organization, what have you.
Yeah, it's funny, Trevor, when I first started talking about this whole subscription economy thing.
Yeah.
Back in the day, which was almost a decade ago, it was like, okay, well, what do you mean subscription economy? I was like, well, like Netflix and Amazon Prime, and people would be like, oh yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
But today, like nobody needs an explanation. They're just like,
no, totally. I mean,
half the time they just roll their eyes. It's like, oh, great, another subscription.
Yeah. Back then, it was like, for me, I don't know why, I think of like enrollment fees and monthly memberships at like a gym.
Yep.
And how long has that been a business for?
Oh my gosh, forever.
You know what I mean? It's like.
Yeah, well, it's funny when I'm at conferences, I always ask people what they think of when they think of subscriptions. And I'd say it's about 50-50 on the like sort of positive connotations. And I love it. And it's super helpful and ongoing value. And then like 50% like, that one I forgot that they then charged me for, or I got tricked or whatever, right?
They got you.
And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But the thing I always think about, Trevor, is Reader's Digest. Like when I'm a child of the 80s, I remember my mom would get the Reader's Digest every month. And I was probably more excited about it than she was. I'd like flip through.
We got Sports Illustrated weekly, and I would literally wait by the mailbox for it. You know what I mean? Same thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, subscriptions are not new. I mean, and we all recognize that.
Yeah.
But, and my background is in fundraising, marketing for charities. I've done a lot in digital fundraising. And so I cut my teeth on the kind of era in the, late 90s, early 2000s when like this whole digital thing was relatively new. And I remember in the early days of fundraising, Trevor, they didn't understand that, it was just new. And so there was a lot of like trepidation, and am I going to put my credit card in online? And
absolutely.
Right. All those things. And so I had seen a pattern in that time where it took some consumer trends, people getting used to buying products online and e-commerce. And those trends preceded what ultimately became changes in donor behavior and philanthropic behavior. Same thing happened with social media. Early days of, MySpace and Facebook were not good for fundraising. That was not, the mental model didn't make sense to people.
Right.
Well, fast forward a few years, people get used to opening their wallets with regards to their social media presence, and voila, 2000, probably late 2000s, 2008, 2009 was when it was kind of unleashed that, social media was a place to do fundraising.
Yeah.
Well, so I saw, about 12 years ago when the subscription economy started, I thought, that looks familiar. I've seen these trends. And so it was honestly only about, so I've been speaking about it for, 8-9 years at this point, but it was 3 years ago that I was like, okay, this is a big deal.
Yep.
It's a wave that's hitting us right now. It's something that more nonprofits than ever before can actually take advantage of.
Probably not going away.
Not going away. This is, I talked to somebody the other day, like, oh, okay, so is this going to be done in a couple of years? I'm like, no, this is a new normal for at least the next decade or two.
Yeah.
And it'll morph as all things do, but it's here to stay. And nonprofit leaders haven't thought strategically about how to like actually take advantage of that from a philanthropic generosity perspective. And so it's like a huge opportunity. People aren't talking about it, and it's not obvious how to apply those lessons. So it was 3 years ago that I said, I think somebody needs to write a book. I think that's me. So started the research and all the messy process of putting a book into the world, which I've not done before. And it's here today. I'm super excited.
No, it's awesome. Hats off to you for doing it too. And it's unique. I mean, I'm sure that there's been some papers written about sustainable giving and what have you, but your approach is super unique to it. And then your history with it. And I think it's just, I love that where you're just like, you identify like, okay, there's something here. Like, I'm going to volunteer to write this book about it. But you have so much history. And I want to go back to what you mentioned about the late 20-aughts, for instance.
Yeah.
And how much speaking you've done about this, where, because you were talking about early 2000s and like open rates, and you're talking like early internet, like, web 1, web 2 stuff, right? So I get that in the history there, and then how it's been received by just, the population. When you originally were really getting, like, realized there was meat on the bone for recurring donations, a subscription economy and all that stuff, what were you advising folks to do? Were you advising folks to start asking via email? Pick up the phone and say, hey, there's an email coming, like what, a direct mail piece, like, or some combination thereof, because every organization is so unique. What would you say to folks when you're like, hey, listen, there's something here, and they're like, okay, cool, we'll listen? How would you get them started back in the day?
Back in the day, in the early days, it was, well, first of all, there was just that first noticing thing. Like I said, even with early social media as a parallel example, I wouldn't say to do much, right? In the early days, it was just like, this will be a thing, I think, at some point. But as it started to become a thing, the easy first move was just to use typical marketing tactics. I would call them single gift tactics where okay, we're going to use direct mail, and in January we're going to send an appeal letter to our donors, and we might send some emails about monthly giving. I keep acting like the old guy here. It's like, I remember when it was like, we don't have a checkbox on our donation form, like for monthly giving. I had a client who, like, literally, if you clicked, monthly giving, it was like, here's an address. And I'm like, what am I going to do with an address? Like, I guess start mailing checks in of my own. So in the early days, it was like, do you have a checkbox on your website? Do you have, do you even talk to your donors at all about monthly giving? But the idea of having like a monthly giving program, other than charities that were like child sponsorship oriented or membership oriented, which are two that have been around for a while, everybody else was like, no, we just basically monthly giving was a transaction type.
Yeah, totally. And then, I mean, it wasn't like a loaded question, but the way I see it now is that you can use all of those forms, like all of those avenues, as long as they're, you mentioned like, here's an address, send a check. It's like, well, let's make it frictionless. Let's make it super easy. I mean, that's a whole nother podcast. Let's make it easy for folks to give, right? And actually, that's not a whole other podcast. We can get into a little bit here too, but it's like, now you can literally use all of those avenues. Yeah. Right. And you're promoting that or talking.
And it's easy to confuse the sort of payment type thing with the strategy. And I don't want to diminish the payment type, because again, giving online, for example, was growing in the early years, double digits just by itself, because people would get comfortable with it. And they're like, oh yeah, I would rather give a gift online than write a check. So that's going to happen, and has been happening with subscriptions and with sustainable giving. So I'm not knocking that. I'm like, let's ride that wave too. But what I'm saying is, what if we actually apply some strategy to this? So in the early digital days, it was like, okay, you've got a website and a donation form, but what if you actually did some fundraising online, and we actually did some outbound messaging? So I'm saying the same thing with recurring giving. If you do nothing but have a good checkbox on your donation website, and a clear, button somewhere, I would hope you're going to see recurring giving growth. That's awesome. I'm talking about how can we accelerate that by actually taking advantage of the fact that donors, more than at any other time in history, are more primed to give on a recurring basis because of, it turns out, they're giving to their church on a recurring basis. They're given to Netflix and Spotify, on a recurring basis, and that has made an opportunity.
Well, they've been conditioned, and I mean that in the best possible way too, like very glass half full. But another thing is, and this is pretty obvious, hopefully to folks, but if not, so be it. But they're doing this with multiple organizations, not just Netflix, but multiple organizations, the church, the food insecurity program in town, the conservation organization, what have you. That's also membership based, for instance. But yeah, there's so many different organizations that folks are giving to in this way. Yeah. Right. Like there's a wave of that giving.
Yep. And the way I describe it in the book is historically there have been three kinds of recurring giving, just to rattle those off really quick. The first one would be like one-to-one, meaning like sponsorship, like the donor actually knows or is somehow connected with the beneficiary of the donation. So it's like, I sponsor, Telma in Guatemala, and I, she shares a birthday with my oldest daughter, and we get letters and all that kind of stuff, or maybe a missionary sponsorship or a staff support. So that's one-to-one. But the problem historically has been most charities don't have the kind of model that supports doing one-to-one, right? Yeah. So that's the first type. The second type of recurring giving historically has been what I would call membership. So that's where the donor is at least partially the beneficiary of the organization's programs or services. So think of your local public television or public radio or the zoo, local zoo, museum, art institution, content-oriented nonprofits. There's a lot of nonprofits for which at least partially the purpose of the nonprofit actually directly benefits the donor. It's education, it's helping my kids, or helping me be a better parent or whatever. And that's awesome. And those are more membership oriented. But again, the problem is the vast majority of charities don't have the kind of program where they're directly providing any sort of benefits to donors, which leaves the third category, which I estimate is about 75% of all nonprofits. Okay. And that is literally everybody else just essentially been left behind. The local food bank, the relief and development charity, the homeless charity, all these organizations that have not been able to tap into recurring giving. And I'm excited about all of it. And I think the subscription economy is candidly changing all of those three categories. Yeah. But I'm most excited about that third category of those charities that have historically been left behind, but don't have to be anymore.
Yeah. I mean, when you said that like, for instance, that 75% of all the others, there's a good cross section of them that aren't utilizing recurring giving right now in any facet at all, which is not, it's once again, it's very encouraging. I'm not downtrodden about it, but there's just nothing but opportunity.
That's why it's so exciting. And then candidly, that's why I wrote the book, because it's like, okay, this is something, and I work, Imago Consulting, we work with organizations directly to do this work, of course. But I started to do the math. 75% of the charities in the US today, that's 1.1 million nonprofits in the US. Right. That need to hear this message. And that is far more than the sort of one-to-one type of work, that intensive work that we do as advisors. Right. So I said, okay, how can I shed a light on this for the sector and help to candidly reshape the way we approach this, whether it's charities and the way they approach it, or candidly even providers, folks like you and I talked a little bit offline. I'm curious as to how and if recurring giving is starting to crop up in the live event space and in the major gift space, right?
1 million.
What does it look like?
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is, you have been you've been in this space for so long. You have so much history, and 9 years we've been in, and you and I once again we're talking offline, but we'll be in 2,000 events this year, right? And we're don't get the opportunity to shout from the rooftops, hey, you need to have like a monthly recurring option at your live event. We're not telling that because there's so much going on. It's the timing and the packaging is not right. Like we're talking to someone that it hasn't occurred to them yet. And they might even have like a monthly recurrent, program, right now. But the fact that you can, and so my point being is we are hearing from a lot of organizations that are like, hey, listen, we propped this up, this table or this QR code at the table that we were sitting at, and we had 300, it's like, how often do you get 300 of your top supporters, people that would actually, bleed for your mission in one room on one evening. Everyone's there. As a matter of fact, most of them paid to be there. How could you not take advantage of that? And the feedback that we're getting is from the folks that have like, hey, we did this and it worked tremendously well. And I went to a film festival for a trail organization, and they had 1,000 people in attendance. It's like 1,000 people, whatever percentage, gets on board with the monthly recurring, and they're giving you $20-$30 a month. I think the lowest price point was like $20. I'm like, that is real train riding money. I mean, it's wild, the opportunity. So I'm very passionate about the opportunity to do it in the live space for sure. But I'm also very, very passionate about having live events where there's no auction, which is kind of like that's our
it's
world.
Not just the auction, yeah.
Yes, because it's like this is you're building the community, right? So, and I don't know if that's going to be unpopular for someone in our position to be saying, sure. But you get the point, Well,
in live events, period, are candidly, I have a section in the book where I break down channels that are more conducive to what I would call acquisition, meaning brand new donor, never given a gift at all, and their first gift is a recurring gift.
Maybe they're a guest,
versus what I would call conversion, which is you take an existing donor and they become a recurring donor. Both of those are awesome. Let's do both of those.
Yeah.
Some organizations, candidly, are more wired. Their offer and the kind of nature of their work is more wired either towards acquisition or towards conversion.
Yeah.
I have an entire chapter of the book on how to know which one you are.
Perfect.
And the thing, though, is that live events is one of the best channels for both acquiring and converting existing donors. And Trevor, one of the things I'd love to think about, even in the work that you guys are doing, is I had a client literally yesterday say, my team is a little bit worried because we have what we call mid or major donors.
Yeah.
And if they commit to a monthly gift, does that mean, they'll give $100 a month, but they're not going to give that $10,000 gift at the end of the year or at the banquet or whatever.
Yeah.
And in my experience so far, the answer is both and. The answer is the people that are giving the giving on a monthly or a quarterly or an annual basis, the recurring giving, that is just a sign almost of like, I don't want to call it loyalty because I don't think it's loyalty.
Sure.
But like care and passion for the cause.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's like I give and people give it in their own means. So I had a client a couple of months ago. We ran a campaign and for new recurring donors, online, offline campaign. Mm-hmm. And they hit the goal. It was great. A couple hundred donors. They had a donor sign up for $5,000 a month. Amazing. And I was like, what? Like,
how long do they have to work to get a $5,000 level donor the first time, or anytime? Yeah.
And my point is not you're going to get a lot of $5,000 donors, although that is happening increasingly. I spoke at a conference recently, and somebody came up to me afterwards and said, "We have a $50,000 donor," and I was like, "A month on their credit card?" And I was like, "Yep." I said, somebody's getting a lot of miles, but I'll take that $600,000 gift.
Absolutely.
But the thing that's interesting to me is it's more of a sign of like, I care about this cause.
Yeah.
And this is what we found in the data, Trevor. We found that the average donor, the average nonprofit raising recurring giving sees an additional 25% giving on top of whatever their annualized recurring gift amount. So the easy way to do the math would be like if your charity brings in $100,000 or $1 million in recurring gifts online from recurring donors, those same donors will give, if it's $100,000, $25,000. If it's $1 million, $250,000 in addition to their regular giving. Because if you think about it, like they are the most loyal, the most top of mind.
Yes.
They're the most likely to give that one-time gift. And so we're doing some exciting experiments with clients that have those mid and major donors to say, how do we look at the recurring giving not as like their total giving, but as just a part of keeping them close and engaged with the organization?
Question. I mean, I think about it almost like, because we're trying to create a new vernacular, right? Not trying, we are, where it's like, I don't really call folks donors. I mean, it's just a blanket term, but I like it's supporters, they're investors. And so I mean by saying investors, like I think about it like investment. It's like I can go buy a Bitcoin or I can put money into a mutual fund, or I can, and I'll do that, right? We'll do that. We'll put, the $10,000 into your retirement, and I can also, put $50 a week in. which folks do, or every 2 weeks, right? So even think about like this from an investment perspective, because that's exactly what those folks are. They're investors, they're stakeholders.
Yep.
They're your raving fans, the folks that care the most. And I think about it that way. And we're constantly trying to just nudge nonprofits. Another label that was created by an accountant. I don't even like that one. So trying to create a new vernacular there too, right? But yeah, just to think about it in that regard. When you say these things about how likely folks are to be a major giver or a mid-level giver, and then also a monthly recurring giver, one thing that I think about a lot is making sure that organizations understand that every time they communicate, they're not asking for money. So I kind of want to get into a little bit about just the feedback on what you've seen, because you're speaking at these conferences, you've done so much research of the book and then all your history involved. What are you telling folks about? I mean, you could label it a planned gratitude. It's like someone gave that $5,000 level, or someone gave at the $100 level monthly. How are we not overstaying our welcome with communication? Is the next communicative piece a thank you, a phone call if it's a certain level, which I'm really okay with? All donors and supporters, I just use the term, all supporters and investors are important, but there's ones that give at the $10,000 level at your live event. You need to pick up the phone and thank them, right? That kind of stuff. So we call it plan. So like, what is the cadence, so to speak? I know there's not some perfect scenario because every organization is so unique and the atmosphere of these events are so different and whatever, but what is that like or maybe I'm overthinking it. Do you just need to be careful not to, every time you reach out to someone, you're asking them for money?
No, I don't think you're overthinking it. Honestly, I think this is one of the areas we can learn the most from the subscription economy. Okay. And if you think about it, the way subscriptions work is the only way they survive, the only way they actually make money and are successful as a business is not because they get you as a subscriber, but because they keep you as a subscriber.
Exactly.
The way the math works, they lose money on every new subscriber, like a lot of money sometimes. But the whole point is, if we can provide an engaging, ongoing experience that keeps that customer, that's where in the case of their business, they actually, it works. Yeah. And so if you do the math on recurring giving, and I have done the math, the average amount of giving, that a donor gives, that becomes a recurring monthly donor, 97% of the value that they give comes after that first recurring gift. 97% of the value.
Embellish for the audience a little bit.
Yeah, so if you knew that the vast majority of the giving you were going to get from this quote unquote new donor was in the future, how would you treat them? How would you think about that relationship? Yeah. You've already got them, quote unquote, in this case, giving on a recurring basis, right? So they're having that monthly credit card transaction or ACH transaction happen. So with subscriptions, they're very intentional about how do we engage you and how do we provide, in subscription world, benefits and
value.
How do we actually provide value? Yeah, it's a little bit less, I think, about benefits like, oh, we sent you a widget, right, or whatever in the charitable space, although that does happen. And it's more about how do we actually engage these people. And so what I recommend is not asking. There is I have a chapter in the book on upgrades, and they are the very generous additional givers, but they should not receive the same communication stream, all of the same asks. Right. You're definitely moving into more of a cultivating that relationship mode with strategic, additional gift opportunities and strategic upgrades, because subscriptions do that too. Yeah. But you have to think about, what does that ongoing relationship look like, and how do we maintain that?
I hear you saying you need to be deliberate about the messaging.
Yeah.
Keep folks involved with the impact where their dollars are going. It sounds cliche to say in our space, but it's the truth, right? That's what I hear you saying. I wanted to take just a quick right turn and ask you, so, you got the organization that's part of that 75%, chunk of all the others, we call them, right? Not membership based and not, direct, my kid's school or a museum or zoo where I take my children and my family or what have you. So, someone's not utilizing a recurring program right now, a monthly recurring program or any program like that for sustained giving in that regard. And they go, the trepidation that we've had is that we serve 16 programs in our region. And it's hard to articulate where the money's going or what have you when we're asking folks. How do you, because I know you've come across them before, how do you just get folks over the hump, so to speak, of the trepidation of going, hey, it's like, how do you dilute it, long story short, or for fear of dilution, I suppose, right? It's like, how do you have that conversation with folks that need to get over the hump?
Well, I think one of the hurdles that I hear sometimes is that that designation issue of specific programs or whatever. The beauty of recurring giving, candidly, is it's almost always undesignated, essentially from a financial term financial perspective. But I always advocate for specificity, which may sound like, wait, what do you mean? So I always say this is what our mission of our organization is, and our monthly donors or our partners or what friends or whatever we call them. They're standing with this mission and making this mission possible in a way that would not be possible otherwise. And so it's really, in that case, it's very broad. But then I always recommend that you essentially color that vision in with some specific examples. So you can say, then once you've said that, our monthly donors make this possible. Then you can say, for example, and then be super specific and detailed. Mm-hmm. You just need to be very clear. You're not saying your monthly gift only does this one super specific,
here's a great example thing. Yeah.
Yep. And I have a client right now. We're doing a campaign. They have a huge deadline that the public would know about out there that they're working on, and it's here in about a month. And so they are pointing to that as one very concrete reason why we need people to step up and be a part of supporting the ongoing work of this. Not that the need is over in a month, but the nice thing as a fundraiser is, like, right now there's a need we need to meet. And this is one of the kinds of things that your monthly gift will make possible.
I think people respond to that kind of urgency, for lack of a better term, too, of course, right? Obvious. Yeah. That's what we all do. We had a really good friend, Christy Jeffries, and she was working for the Oklahoma City Catholic Charities.
Okay.
And she started a monthly recurring program from the ground up, handwritten notes, the whole thing. And she said, my max, the handwritten notes, the max I could do was 400. And so when we went automated, she's like, after that, that's a lot of work. She's a amazing fundraiser, a really, really great person. She's moved on from that organization since, and is at a museum, ironically enough. But that being said, one thing that really, really stood out, other than the fact that she was able to create from scratch a $600,000 annual recurring program, amazing, right? Huge. We can't guarantee that to everybody, of course. That's not the point. She did this from the ground up, very grassroots. What I thought was uncanny was it was one of those situations where it was Catholic Charities of Oklahoma City, and then was another one of those scenarios where there's 16 programs they're serving, but that's okay. We're past that now. Yeah. Okay, she branded the recurring program as the Halo Project.
Ooh,
and I thought the exclusivity involved and the invitation and just, I was just like, holy smokes, the light bulb went off when she said that. And I was like, did you know what you just did? Like, did you know like what you were doing in the moment? She's like, not really, but I realize now in hindsight. And I'm just like, being in business and in general, and I'm a big brand person, and likability and trustworthiness and all these things that you need to have for folks to give. But just like the fact that she rebranded it as the Halo Project and had so much success, there has to be something to that. There's something in the water. And so I just want to give some feedback of like something you've experienced with that, or how you recommend that given the organization or whatnot. Just speak to that if you don't mind.
Well, and that's an example of moving beyond recurring giving as a gift type or as a checkbox.
Yeah.
And that's one of the main things I'm advocating for. One of the main ways to take advantage of the subscription economy and how generosity has been shifting is to actually design an actual program. Now, when I say design, I don't just mean graphically, although that's handy too. But but what is it called? How do you refer to them?
It's like a new vertical. I think it's just like such a cool way to look at it, man.
And the way that I talk about it in the book is it's really important to design the program. It's so often organizations just sort of start doing tactics. They do the direct mail piece, or they do the, the email campaign or whatever. And that's fine. We need to do tactics. But it's when you actually have something you can refer to that's concrete. And so I actually have an entire chapter in the book, in the part of the book that's about designing and building a thriving recurring giving program on that very question, including, by the way, Trevor, whether you should name it, and if you should name it, which, by the way, you should name it.
Cool.
What you should name it.
Let's
so some people use there's two different kinds of naming, and I, again, unpack it at length in the book, but just briefly, there's two different ways to name a program. Number one is what I would call a descriptive name. So it's like blank partners. It's like more just describes them, versus, and that's fine. Probably, I don't know what percentage, but maybe half of the organizations do what I would call a descriptive name.
You're like a Friends of XYZ charity.
Right. Yeah. And I think that can be a little dangerous in that it just becomes not memorable and they don't know what you're referring to. And I talk about some pros and cons of that. But then the other way, and the way your friend did it, was what I would call a fanciful name, which is, by the way, these are legal terms. They call it descriptive and fanciful in trademark law. But a fanciful name is more like a metaphor or an idea, or like it's a little more, or maybe it's a made up word or Latin or whatever, right? And the Halo Project is a perfect example of a fanciful name.
Right.
And so I don't necessarily, I do talk about the pros and cons of each and how to both maximize the pros and minimize the cons depending on which way you go. But that is a kind of idea, a piece of creating an embodied program that you can actually now refer to, recruit to. And this is where like events come in, and I'm like, if you just say, would you raise your hand and give a monthly gift, that's a thing, I guess. But if you say be a part of the Halo Project, and I'm already thinking of all the cool metaphors she probably was able to use, right? We're not saying that you're a saint, but
you could be tonight. You could be tonight.
It's like, I don't know how you handle that theologically, but there's some pretty cool ideas
that's
that you can bring into that, right?
Exactly.
So it's super, super cool. I love that.
Hey, everybody, just want to remind you that this lovely episode of Hey Nonprofits Raise More Money is brought to you by the event fundraising specialists at HGA Fundraising. HGA Fundraising, the most profitable auction items in fundraising, perfect for your next silent auction, live auction, online auction. Use it for raffles, door prizes, anything under the sun. HGA Fundraising is here to help you raise more money. They're a bunch of fun-loving party people, great fundraisers, great customer service, and great with your donors. Be sure to reach out to HGA Fundraising for your next fundraising event. Now, back to the episode. Well, we get into, in our space, of course, silent auction, raffles, live auction, and in one of those kind of like gala environments, which not every, by the way, not every live event has to be this way, but it's not a trend for sure anymore. It's not going anywhere. There's like the fund a need or mission moment where folks at the end of the live auction, typically, depending on the event, but typically it's at the end of the live auction, are making straight donations. Yeah. $100, $10,000, $25,000, right? And I just like the idea of just kind of like just double tapping on that momentum of being like, and even offering like an incentive, like in our case, it'd be like a tripper experience for the last person that gives, at that level. And, you have the software, you're doing it in real time because you have a bidder number. Why not sign up right then for a monthly recurring? I mean, this is how we look at it, from an event perspective. And I think a lot of fundraisers, a lot of folks in development should look at it this way, whether they're event fundraisers or not. You have an opportunity to get folks in the same room at the same time. You really have to, and I've heard this once again from the best fundraiser I've ever met, you have to squeeze every dollar that you can, and I'm using this all due respect, out of that room. And if you can add one thing like a door prize or another raffle or just another revenue stream, another revenue generator, you have to take advantage of it, And then I just heard someone say this so perfectly recently about talking to new supporters and what have you, or someone that gave the $5,000 level at the event that just happened. Your best prospect list. This sounds like an opinion, but we could run through it. But it's like your best prospect list is the list of folks that just attended your event, your biggest event. So maybe you get on the phone with them or send them that email about the monthly recurring if you didn't take advantage of it in the moment, right? But your best prospect list, folks that would showed up and showed out, were just at your event. You know what I mean? So that's something very interesting that our friend Susanna from MDA does a ton of events, and they do such a phenomenal job. And she said that, I was like, oh my gosh, I was blown away. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
well, and it's such a great, you talked about branding. It's a great time because you have people's attention and you can really lean, again, the Halo Project. I love that. You can really lean into it. And as a community, as a part of the people who care about this cause, I didn't mention it, but one of the other reasons recurring gifts or recurring donors are so valuable is because they're 6 times more likely than general donors to leave a estate or planned gift or a major gift in that way. And so that kind of legacy giving opportunity is only just aided by, leaning into that commitment. So it's not the end all be all for your big donors, but it often increasingly it seems to be a sign of that kind of, hey, I'm a part of this cause.
No question. Yeah, they feel like they're a part of something. Once again, it's that community piece. Sounds cliche at this point, but it's so true. What do you do, Dave? As far as someone gets on board and I want you to tell me kind of the level, and every organization is so different, but are there things that you coach organizations on? Hey, you got 10 new $100 level recurring donors this month. Do you coach folks and development teams regardless of how much they're staffed? I mean, there's the average organization is 2.5 staff members,
right.
Paid, but you have volunteers that you can mobilize in a committee and a board too. But are you nudging folks to get on the phone if they're, hosting an event or running a capital campaign or what have you to motivate and encourage those folks because they've given once. I call it they're over the pain of giving. The best time to sell something is right after you sold something. You know what I mean? They've already felt that pain, and that's a very loose term. They're not feeling any pain. They're probably feeling joy.
Well,
right?
That's actually to jump on that. The most, and this is very similar to the other comment about the donors post event. The most likely time for a new, what I would call single gift donor to become a monthly donor is within the first 30 to 60 days of the first gift.
Right.
Because it's not the pain. It's actually the euphoria. It's the time in which they are the most jazzed up about it.
Yeah.
Can I tell you a personal story?
No, that's what we need. The audience needs to hear the story.
I have 2 daughters, ages 11 and 14, and our church just did a campaign. They every February, they do a campaign in partnership with a charity called Atlas Free. Atlas Free basically fights human trafficking around the world and domestically, and they do a campaign called I don't think they call it a campaign, but it's called Freedom February.
Okay.
And the whole idea is do what you love to fight what you hate. And so people throughout the month of February will do one bunch of teenagers did a free throw shooting contest, and just different kinds of do what you love to raise money to for donations to this organization called Atlas Free. So my 11-year-old is a baker. She loves baking. So she's oh, I know what I'm going to do, So she calls grandma, and gets a donation to bake some goods. And then my 14-year-old got really into it as well. And so they both ended up setting a goal, $400, which, by the way, they're 11 and 14.
Awesome. Yeah.
Awesome. To give to this charity, and did their different sales and had a little market, and basically ended up hitting it was $440 at the last day of the month. Hit their goal. They're euphoric. We're celebrating as a family. How cool, And honestly, Trevor, now, and this isn't because Daddy just wrote a book on it, by the way, but on the way home, the kids were just super excited, and we talked as parents, generosity is not just this sort of one-time thing. It's not just the dollar you put in the red kettle at Christmas, or the one disaster response gift. It's ongoing generosity. And so, literally, in the actually just this weekend, as we're talking, this last weekend, we sat down and each of them set up an actual recurring gift to the charity of their choice. My youngest chose the Humane Society.
Cool.
She's loves the pets.
She loves animals.
And my oldest chose the Alice Free organization.
Yeah.
And they're given, literally, by the way, I was so excited as a dad that they could, because I think they're giving like $1 or $2 a month,
Totally cool. Yeah.
And I'm like, man, I'm glad the donation form didn't reject them and say that's not good enough. But I only say that because it's just this, it's a part of, increasingly a part of people's just philanthropic behavior to say like, why would I wait until December 31st or until the auction? This organization needs my support all year round. Yeah. And yes, I will respond at the auction and I will do the year-end gift. Yeah. But why wouldn't I give on an ongoing basis? And that's just increasingly the case.
Hats off to you for having that communicating that to your children at such a wonderful age, because obviously that's going to stick with them for a very long time. B, the market's obviously telling you something.
Fair.
I love it when you go, oh my goodness, it's working. The market's telling us something. That's what I say. When I heard what was it? I think I was very early on into our company, and I heard someone say yeah, we're on our way to the silent auction on like a movie on Netflix or something like that. I'm like, we're on to something.
All right, we're on to something. We're on to something. Well, that's the thing. And, you've heard a couple wave metaphors here. I literally write a weekly column called The Wave Report. So it's cool. All about what are the waves that leaders need to be paying attention to. Yeah. That they need to just understand or discern whether or not they're relevant to you. And so probably maybe 1 in 4, 5, 6 wave reports is even about recurring giving. Sometimes it's about this Friday. It's about the artificial intelligence and how it's transforming fundraising and marketing. Yeah. Last week it was about a leadership lesson. So I am a big proponent of let's not make up waves. Let's not try to paddle when it's too early or too late. Let's identify what are the waves that are happening and let's just catch those. Get on. Yeah. There's a principle we can learn.
Well, metaphorically, there's so many. I mean, it's easier to push a boulder downhill than up. It's all these things.
Yeah, go with the momentum.
Yes, precisely. Yeah. If you have a little wind behind us, that's also lovely. Hey, the Wave Report. Where can folks find that? Actually, while we're hitting that.
Yeah, easy to find that just on our website. Actually, if you go to the website, so our website is imago.consulting, which is imago.consulting. Cool. But you can also just go to sustainablегiving.org. That's where the book is. Cool. And that will send you to the Imago website. And you can just get weekly trends at the top there.
That's the easiest way. I mean, I found the book on Amazon super easy. It was in my house in 48 hours. So, okay, cool. Yeah. All right. I wanted you to tell folks where they could find that. What's funny, and I'm backtracking here, sorry.
No, that's fine.
I like to chase rabbits. But the other piece about asking and folks giving, it's why do folks give? Well, they give because you ask. Yeah. There's a very clever way and a right and a wrong way to go about that. What's funny is you said something about year-end giving, and 10% of all the money given in the U.S. is given the last 10 days of the year. And my partner, Jason, asked me, why do you think that is? He said, why do you think that the last 10 days, 10% of all the money in the U.S. is given? I said, oh man, geez, I don't and it's not, the answer is not taxes. It is not the answer.
And less so more and more if you know tax law. But
he said, it's because they ask. It's because organizations ask. Yeah. The Giving Tuesday thing is a phenomenon for sure. Probably not going anywhere, but that last 10 days of the year is not about taxes because folks ask. Yeah. And it's very interesting. And there's, like I said, there's a right way and a wrong way to go about it. I like to ask every guest that we have on a question, and I'm going to pose the question to you. Fundraising is hard. Don't make it more difficult by doing what?
Ooh, that's a good one. Okay,
Is that the best one anyone's asked on a podcast before, you think?
Well, I haven't heard that one. I was like...
It's unique to me, man, but you can use it. You can use that.
Fundraising is hard. Yep. Don't make it more
difficult by doing what?
Ooh, I like that. Fundraising is hard. Fundraising is hard.
Exactly.
I don't disagree with that.
That was the premise of the that was the premise of the whole
Do I accept the premise was the first question. And yes, I do accept the premise.
Yes.
we'll continue our wave conversation. I just don't think you should, swimming upstream is not right with the wave conversation, but it's just like go with the natural momentum. I think one of the things I've most appreciated, I wrote a talk a couple of years ago called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective Chief Development Officers.
Cool.
Sound familiar? But not Stephen Covey.
Exactly.
But it was just, hey, I've been doing fundraising now for 20 years. I've worked with a lot of organizations. Mm-hmm. I've met thousands of nonprofit leaders. I've been around. And I just wanted to capture what are some things that I noticed about nonprofit leaders that I really admire.
Yeah.
And one of the 7 that I shared was that they understand and they leverage what I call their natural resources. So what sort of natural strengths does their organization have? Because so often I see nonprofit leaders sort of kind of, man, if only we had a celebrity founder, we would be doing so much better, or
but you don't.
Yeah, I know. What if we had like $1 billion,
you don't have the number to the local billionaire. Sorry.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And then what if we had an endowment, that we were just drawing off of? Wouldn't that be cool? And it's like, well, you don't. So, but the flip side of that is I've noticed that they're really good. Effective nonprofit leaders are really good at understanding, like, okay, but what do we have that actually others might look at and be like, oh, we don't have that. Yeah. And how do you leverage those natural strengths? So perfect example with sustainable giving. I always recommend the first thing to do is just benchmark where you are today. 2 simple questions. How many, how much? How many recurring donors do you have today? And then how much are they giving and I like to express that on a monthly and annual basis. What's your MRR, which is monthly recurring revenue, and your ARR, which is annual recurring revenue. That's what that subscription businesses, by the way, live or die on MRR and ARR.
Yeah.
But nonprofits don't think, oh, well, we have 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 monthly donors, and we're bringing in blank, on a monthly basis. So just answer those 2 questions, and then don't compare yourself to Charity Water or to Compassion International or Save the Children or whatever, because they started wherever they started, a decade plus ago or 50 years ago, depending on who it is. Compare yourself to yourself. Like, where are you today? And then where are you tomorrow? And how are you growing from there?
Yeah. And make sure you're going up. I love that. Yeah, MMR and AR, that's not a common acronym in the
If I have something to do about it, we will start using MRR. And I don't mean that in a crass, I think some people might hear this message, by the way. I don't mean this in like a consumeristic way, but it's just like, I don't know what the quote was, but whatever you measure matters, or however that quote goes. It's important. If you're looking at that number, it's so weird how it might actually shape your behavior to help that number.
It gives you something to focus on too. I mean, you don't have to be the most data-driven person. I like the one of my favorites is comparison is a thief of joy. And you said, don't look at Charity Water or like this other organization, like for your playbook or the benchmark. And they're doing a lovely job, by the way. Like you
can learn great things. They're featured in the book. They're in the opening chapter. I interviewed Brady Josephson, was their VP of growth there. Yeah, there are a lot of things we can learn from them, but don't catch yourself saying, well, we have 10 donors today. We don't have 80,000. Well, that's not a helpful comparison.
Great. Exactly. Yeah. And it's just like another thing with giving in general that I think is very, very common. I've talked to corporate sponsor aficionados and experts on the phone, all these things. It's like, you can't be everything to everyone either. So just realize not everyone's going to vibe on your story. It's okay. You have to start all these things. Like there are a lot of great playbooks out there, but your organization is not going to be everything to everyone. That's I don't know why I took that left turn, but it's just something to be aware of. You know what I mean? Like people will have an emotional attachment to the work that you do. No question. If you're articulating and expressing it, communicating it properly. But it's not, you're not going to be everything to everyone either, right? So it's just the reality of it. Yeah.
Well, and it's amazing how, ironically, when you do focus on who your passionate tribe is, how big that actually can get. So it's that mistake is sort of like when you do try to be everything to everyone. Yeah. You often end up with a smaller audience. Ironically, if you actually focused on what we're really deeply passionate about. Yeah. Then you actually are going to find more people that are also passionate about that.
There are so many parallels to like your personal life. You have a family, kids, and I do too. I have 2 daughters as well. We have that in common.
Girl dad.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm surrounded by women. Our first employee was my sister. So it's
you and I should talk offline. I was raised.
Precisely. But like you just said something very, very interesting about like the people that are there, that are a part of your organization, that are supporters right now. I think about this a lot because I started writing a book about, when I didn't like give myself permission. I just started the company and acted like myself. The way I was with my friends, my family, my wife, I acted that way with clients and partners. And I was just me, and a lot of natural like thankfulness, graciousness, gratitude, whatever you want to use moniker to describe, comes naturally to me. And also pace. I'm usually very highly caffeinated, and I think the worst thing in customer service is silence. However, like, it's like it's really okay to work with someone to create that relationship. It's very, very easy for us to take that for granted in our personal life, in our business life, in the role that we're in as development professionals and fundraisers in general. And I think we get into a space sometimes where we think no news is good news. And that person gave, and they don't need to hear from me again. And, and Trev, like we'll coach some folks, like, what would I say? And I was like, if you don't know what to say, you can start with thank you. Because no news is not good news. You know what I mean? Like, we get in that Monday, every day, day in, day out stuff at home. We get in that with our, supporters and our partners and clients and all that stuff. And I'm telling you right now, a lot of folks are just they're brushing to the side. They're going, they don't need to hear from me. They do. Do you know what I mean? So do not take that for granted in your personal life. If you're a for-profit company, if you're raising money for a specific mission, do not take that for granted, because those folks are your lifeblood. They're your raving fans. You know what I mean? So good stuff. Yeah. Rant over. Hey, I can't thank you enough for being so gracious with your time. I can't thank you enough for the book and having this conversation. I think there's a lot there. As mentioned, a recurring theme in the episode, the market is telling us something. You've uncovered a lot of that with the book. You told folks where they could find it. Dave, tell folks the easiest way for them to find you, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so book is super easy, sustainablegiving.org. No spaces, super simple. And then if you want to find me, one, that'll send you to the Imago website. You can find out what we do. But LinkedIn is my favorite. I mean, I'm so grateful for, professional social media. I share pretty regularly there. Like I said, I write the weekly column, The Wave Report. That's on the website. And occasionally I post it to LinkedIn. But it's where folks can find me.
That's awesome. Yeah. Hey, that's where we met. And it's not, LinkedIn is so cool in our space. It's a real social network.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? It's really not. I don't mean to correct you, but it's just true. Like, everyone is just so kind in our space. There is so much gold for fundraisers and development professionals on LinkedIn. So reach out to Dave, and can't thank you all enough for tuning in. Can't thank you enough for the time, brother. Really, really special episode. Appreciate you.
Yeah, enjoyed the conversation. I hope this is helpful for your folks. Love the work you guys are doing, and even just seeing the sort of the cross-pollination that happens in generosity. That's been super fun.
Right on, brother. Well, here's your invite to come back as well at some point. So thanks so much for taking the time. Yeah, appreciate you, bro. All right. Take care, everybody. Thanks so much for the time. Thanks so much for tuning in, and be sure to show Dave some love on LinkedIn and get the book as well. It's fantastic.